everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Thank you so very much for joining us. Very important things to talk about today. First, a federal appeals court late Friday upheld Wisconsin's voter ID law and said the state can require people to show an ID if they want to vote. Second, is President Obama beginning another war, or is he doing what has to be done? Then, here in Milwaukee, why has it taken so long for the family of Dontre Hamilton to get some answers about why he was shot 14 times and killed by a Milwaukee police officer? And finally, does Baltimore Raven Ray Rice deserve to be banned from football for life for punching his wife? Okay, let me introduce everybody. You know longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally and Kevin Fischer, who spent many years as a broadcast journalist. Denise Callaway, communications and public relations professional. And of course, Gerard Randall, education consultant and job creation expert. Rick Horowitz is going to be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, let's talk first about the State of Appeals Court ruling Friday afternoon, a federal court ruling. Wisconsin can tell people if you want to vote here, you have to show an ID. This is a pretty big win for both Governor Walker and the Republicans in the legislature, who argued that requiring people to show an ID, Kevin, isn't onerous and isn't discriminatory.
Not at all. Legal, legal, legal. The last hurdle for opponents of photo ID was that you had to pay to get certain papers in order or to actually get an ID. Well, the state made arrangements now that if you can't afford an ID, that you'll be given an ID free. And as early as this coming Monday, there's a website you can go to. There's a telephone number that's been set up that you can call for more information. People have 9 weeks to get their papers or ID in order. And also, you had that United States Supreme Court decision that played a major role here, that upheld voter photo ID in the state of Indiana, very similar to the Wisconsin law, very strict, but legal. And so I think the court understood that if it was going to act, you had that looming in the background. And I don't think when in this day and age in our society, where really you have to have an ID to survive and needed for so many actions, that this will not be onerous, it will not be discriminatory, and people will be able to handle it. And this is plenty of time for the clerks to get organized, and I think we've used it once in the last couple of years. I don't think it'll be a problem because everybody really has an ID. Denise, it shouldn't be a problem.
The critics have long argued that this is specifically aimed at black voters, Democratic voters in Milwaukee and Madison to squash their vote.
Of course it is. And if you take a look at not just the voter ID issue, but now where the state has passed a law that has told municipalities, we don't care when your citizens want to vote, we're going to limit the time in which there's early voting. This is precisely aimed at suppressing the vote for people of color, and those tend to be people who vote Democratic. That is exactly what will happen. But here's the unintended consequence, or perhaps those who wrote this law and those who voted for it don't care about them either. It's going to have a tremendous impact on elderly individuals. Think about my father-in-law, 91 years old. He doesn't drive a car. He doesn't have a license. But he has voted for longer than any of us on this panel have been alive. Now, he has to go through the process because, again, he doesn't drive. How is he going to get his birth certificate?
You'll help him,
because he doesn't have it.
You'll help him being the good daughter you are.
But the problem with it is not everyone has that kind of a resource. And that's what we're talking about, the elderly. There are people in this community who don't have photo IDs, who don't have them. And it is going to be a burden. It is going to suppress the vote. And that is precisely what the people who voted for this wanted to do.
The appeals court obviously doesn't agree, though.
And I don't agree that that was the intent of the lawmakers, and I don't agree that that's going to be the outcome. The people who, again, in this day and age, as Kevin had pointed out, have the opportunity to get IDs. Those who need assistance in getting IDs, legislators have taken that into account and are looking at ways in which they can mobilize organizations so that those who need assistance in getting those IDs will be able to get the help that they need. They've already eliminated price as a barrier to getting those IDs. So I think that this is something that will give comfort to people like me who believe that the opportunity to vote without having your vote discounted by someone else, canceling out a vote that doesn't have an ID and is going to the polls with the intent perhaps of some mischief, that this just helps to minimize those opportunities for that mischief.
If you need an ID, Joel, to cash a check or to buy a six-pack or to buy a pack of cigarettes, why shouldn't you have an ID to vote?
Because those aren't constitutional rights to buy a six-pack. Voting is a constitutional right. There are people all over this country not only don't have photo IDs, they don't have the birth certificates that they need in order to get a photo ID. The Republican administration in this state claims that they've set up a system that none of us have seen, where they're going to be able to magically find out, you know, that people who don't have birth certificates and don't have official papers are somehow who they are, and they're going to do this between now and the election. What bothers me most about this is the dishonesty of those two people over there and of Republicans in general over this law. Everyone knows the intention behind this law, which is to suppress the vote.
Stop cheating.
Is if to suppress the votes of minorities, of students. When the Wisconsin first passed this, there wasn't a single student ID in the state of Wisconsin that qualified for students to vote. And that Supreme Court decision in Indiana. I know Indiana pretty well, having grown up there, and I know that, you know, it was the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan, and there are a lot of strange laws that are passed there. And when the Supreme Court came down with that decision, I was flabbergasted, because what they said was it was the first voter ID law passed, and what they said was it hasn't been proven that this is going to disenfranchise anybody. That was in 2008. This is 2014, and the Brennan Law Center in New York, Judge Lynn Edelman's decision right here in Wisconsin,
There's a bias,
yes, it is, as a matter of fact, because that decision has been held up as an outstanding decision because it goes to the question of the constitutional right to vote. And 300,000 people in the state of Wisconsin have been identified as being disenfranchised. And between now and November, Scott Walker and the Republicans, and in fact these three Republican judges, including one I happen to know very well, she's actually a friend of mine, but everyone knows she's the ex-wife of a right-wing talk show host here in Milwaukee, and is an extremely right-wing justice. And the pattern of Republican legislatures and Republican governors and now Republican judges approving this, which is disenfranchising hundreds of thousands of people in this state and millions across the country, it is shameful.
No one has been disenfranchised.
Certainly,
which was all part of the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in Indiana. They weren't able to bring anyone forward that said I was disenfranchised.
Because the law hadn't taken effect.
But when it does take effect,
I've got to say this very, very quickly. I think it's very insulting for opponents of photo ID to suggest, as they have many times on this program, that minorities and the elderly and students are incapable of securing a free photo ID, that they have no means of their own to get out there or get somebody to help them get it. That is insulting to that group of people.
What is insulting is to make it seem like all you have to do is go up there and say, my name's Joe Smith and I can get an ID. But that's not the issue. The issue, and you well know it, is that some of the ways in which people have to prove who they are, one of the main ways is through a birth certificate, is something that is very difficult for people to be able to easily put their hands on. And when we see the clock ticking with 9 weeks to go, it is going to disenfranchise people.
And it'll be very easy. The state has made it very easy now to fix that problem.
It is going to disenfranchise people.
All right,
no
next
doubt.
Not at all. No proof of that.
Next topic. Was President Obama announcing the other night that he is going to start bombing Islamic militants in Syria as well as Iraq as the same thing as President Obama saying, okay, I'm starting another war? Is this really an effective strategy? Can we knock this threat out by just dropping hundreds of bombs with no American troops or tanks on the ground? Is this a war? Is it a strategy? Or is it just delaying things for now?
Well, I listened to the president, and I listened with an eye towards having what I had hoped I'd expressed last week reinforced, and that is that the president has a well-articulated strategy for addressing the threat of terrorism to the United States. And the key things that I pulled out was that, okay, he has a plan. That plan has been dissected by almost everyone who listened or read the remarks. The problem that I see the president having is that every time he talks tough, and he did this time around, it gave some people some comfort. But the credibility so far, whenever he talks tough, has been lacking. And that's the piece that I'm hoping will be different with these strategies that he's looking to employ. I think people have been impressed by the number of countries that have come together to say that they're willing to commit resources, particularly ground troops, where the U.S. is now more reluctant to do that. The air game is not going to be sufficient in and of itself, but at least it's going to be employed, and we haven't done that to Syria up until this point. But again, it does get back to me to the reality that every time the president draws verbal lines in the sand, they don't get backed up. And they have the problem of leaving others, especially other foreign leaders, with the question of whether the president is really sincere when he makes these kinds of remarks.
In this whole thing with Syria and Iraq, does he look presidential to you as a commander-in-chief? Does he look hawkish to you?
He looked very strong, I thought, in the address, but what really troubles me, and has troubled me from the start in this whole conversation, I'm very glad that he doesn't want to go to war. I'm very glad that, you know, compared to the last president we had, who was actually eager to get in a war to the point of making up evidence about weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist in order to go to war. It's the only time I remember a president being eager to go to war. I'm glad that we have one that wants to do it only as a last resort. And I think he's trying to, while maintaining strength, not commit ground troops, not go to war, but he has this kind of imaginary idea that we can, you know, send out drones and send airstrikes and kind of, you know, conduct war in a clean way without, you know, getting our hair mussed, as they said in Dr. Strangelove. The truth of the matter is, it is extremely easy to get drawn into war once you start having to posture as tough and posture in order to try to look tougher than Republicans, when you had, you know, the Republicans, many of them eager to push him into this war. And it's just a frightening time. We lived through Vietnam, and we know that it started out with claiming that America was just going to send advisors to give some kind of advice, you know, in Vietnam. And the advice was they ended up, you know, killing and killing millions of innocent people. And the same thing happens with these air wars. You don't just bomb bad guys when you send out drones and airstrikes. You bomb men, women, and children who live in that country.
Is it possible, Kevin, to win a war against these people without losing thousands of American soldiers?
Well, you can't win whatever you want to call this, the way the president outlined it the other night. And let me preface this by saying, look, it's a very difficult decision for any president to decide when and how to use military force. But we didn't learn anything new the other night. We're going to have limited airstrikes, and we're going to have non-American boots on the ground. Well, we have already been doing that, and that really hasn't worked. You're going to pull in about a little less than 500 Iraqi troops. That won't help. And the Iraqi troops, what, for the last 10 or 12 years, no matter how we've trained them, no matter how we've equipped them with weapons, they've been a disaster, a failure. They abandon their posts. They refuse to fight. They basically surrender. They're not going to be of any use to us. We're going to arm Syrian rebels. I really wonder what the Syrian leader, who is butchering thousands and thousands of his own people, will feel about that. Will he really want to strengthen Syrian rebels who may decide that they're going to fight against his regime? I don't think so. So eventually,
And ultimately they will.
So if that fails, okay, and ISIS is empowered and strengthened, then the president is in a real pickle, which I don't envy him, of having to decide whether to send American boots on the ground.
Here's the issue, and I think we have to look at things that are a little bit different. First of all, this is a case where a president has said, this is the plan that we have, and we've actually had significant allied support going into this, and he's lined up that support, and we've had, whether or not we think it's enough, we actually have allies in the Middle East who are willing to step forward now and be part of this effort to get rid of ISIS, because they, better than any of us, certainly understand the real threat that ISIS poses to them now. But I do want to follow up on something that was said earlier about this is a president who makes promises and doesn't happen. That's not true. This is a president who said, we will get bin Laden, and we got bin Laden. This is a president who said, this was, but you know what? He's the commander-in-chief, so I don't know how you separate the two if you're looking at the Constitution of the United States. He has also said, we are going to work to degrade and to work to do our very best to destroy al-Qaeda. That is exactly what has happened.
Come back in another name. Syria, line in the sand drawn, scratched out. Ukraine, line in the sand drawn with Putin. Yes, he did. He absolutely did. He said, if you move into this territory, there will be severe consequences.
And there
have been no severe consequences.
Of course there have been consequences.
Okay, I'll tell you what the consequence is.
Whether or not there have been
Putin has moved even further into the Ukraine. He's already let off missiles that are...
consequences for Russians. There have been sanctions that have been set up by the European Union.
All ineffective.
They're not ineffective because Putin now has already... They're so ineffective.
He just launched a missile to show the United States that he's prepared to attack our own homeland if we make any further incursions of support to the
allies who have taken those actions. That doesn't mean they're ineffective, Gerard.
She doesn't care about listening.
Next topic.
I care about facts.
Let's talk for a few minutes about
several.
Let's talk for a few minutes about Dontre Hamilton. He's the guy who was shot 14 times by a Milwaukee police officer after a struggle in Red Arrow Park. It has been 4 months since he was killed, and the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office has still not decided whether the officer involved will be charged with a crime. Why such a long wait? Is this an intentional delay?
I have no idea, and I have no idea why such a long wait. There has been an outside investigation by the state and a report on it. I have a lot of respect for John Chisholm, I really do, but there seems to be a real reluctance to act. Now he says he wants another outside investigation besides the state's investigation. You know, there are witnesses, there is evidence. There was the fact that 2 police officers tried to roust this guy out of the park and determined that he wasn't doing anything to violate the law and passed on taking any action against him before this officer then said, well, I tried to get him out, and the guy grabbed my baton, and he was hitting me with it. This is a mentally ill individual. There are police officers in this force, not very many, unfortunately, only about a quarter of the force, I think, who have been trained to deal with people with mental illness. And that's clearly the problem here. But the fact that 14 shots, I mean, that is just unbelievable to me. 14 shots for an unarmed, mentally ill individual.
I heard somebody speculate the other day, Kevin, that maybe the delay is because they want to wait for cold weather because the decision will be not to charge the officer, and they didn't want to make that decision on a hot summer day, so there'll be less of a chance
hope
of
that's
unrest.
not. And the assumption is what? That riots will break out in Milwaukee? I hope that's not the case, and I don't think that's.
It's also an absurd assumption.
I would agree. I absolutely would agree, because that's not the way the wheels of justice move. They move slowly. We know that. Sometimes too slowly. Maybe John Chisholm is too busy conducting a witch hunt out of his office, but you know. You want them, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. You want them to get it right, all right? And maybe it's not moving as quickly as many would like. These are complex investigations when you may have, as you alluded to, differing witness testimony, all kinds of evidence to sift through, and maybe that's the time delay. But I'm with you, Joel. I don't know why it's taking so long, but again, I will give the district attorney's office the benefit of the doubt that they are doing all they can diligently to make sure, because of the sensitivity involved here, that they're getting it right.
Are they moving too slow, Denise?
I think they're not moving as quickly as some people would like, but I do think they're being very deliberate about this investigation. Any loss of life is something that deserves to be investigated fully. Anytime you talk about charging any individual, you need to make sure that you have all the facts. And I think that's particularly true when you're looking at possibly charging a police officer who was exercising what he thought were the limits, or taking action that he thought were within the limits of his ability. So I think it's been slow. I think it's been deliberate. I think the stakes are incredibly high. This is a DA who has been reluctant to charge police officers.
All of them are.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, they all are. I mean, it is a bright line. When we have people who put their lives on the line every single day to protect us, you know, where do you want to say, I'm making a judgment that you went too far?
But you also give these people the power of life and death.
You do.
And that also, you know, puts a special responsibility on them.
It does, and I think that also puts a special responsibility on investigating those cases that involve officers, because the ramifications are huge.
All right, let's talk for just a few minutes about Ray Rice. He's the Baltimore Ravens star who was dropped by the team and suspended indefinitely by the NFL after video surfaced this week that shows him punching his wife in an elevator and then dragging her limp body out of the casino elevator. Are you surprised that the NFL didn't take stronger action sooner? Are you surprised that the woman still married him after this happened and then the other day stood by him?
Yes to the first, no to the other two. I grew up in a family and in a neighborhood where domestic violence wasn't unusual. And then I started to think about this particular situation, and I happened to be looking at some old I Love Lucy shows, and there were several episodes where Lucy would cower at Ricky approaching her because of something wrong that she'd done. It just reinforced in my mind this notion that domestic violence was accepted generations ago.
Denise, only about a minute. Were you surprised when his wife the other day accused the media of pumping everything up?
Well, that's exactly what's happened. She referred to this as a horrible incident that they would both like to be able to forget, and I'm sure it was. You know, one of the things that isn't talked about as much is that they both readily admit that they were intoxicated, extremely intoxicated when this happened.
And wrong.
And they were both wrong. She said she spit at him. Now, that doesn't mean that you're giving anybody the right to use physical violence against somebody else, but this is not video that we're showing for entertainment. This is what happened in their real lives. Here's what I don't understand. I do not understand how the NFL, regardless of when they saw the video or whether they didn't see it, there's nothing in that video that changes the facts that they had the day they decided to suspend Ray Rice for 2 games. Yeah. None of that changed.
Except that then now the whole world has seen it.
The whole world knows.
So they have to wipe the egg off their face.
Right. Was it PR or was it penalty? You decide.
Okay, now, a few more thoughts right now on Ray Rice and on what might be the larger implications. Rick Horowitz was as appalled as anybody by the latest video, but he wasn't exactly stunned. And he thinks there's plenty of blame to go around. Rick.
Here's to the gods of the gridiron who can do no wrong, who are sought out and raised up and worshiped precisely for their explosiveness, for their violence, for their ability to inflict and withstand pain, who then shock us beyond all reason, when they neglect to flip the off switch each time they leave the field. Why are we so surprised? What exactly were we expecting? Here's to the fans who can't get enough of the bone-jarring, brain-rattling hits on game day, and to the networks and the sponsors and the leagues and the conferences that are happy to feed that hunger. And here's to the fans who turn a blind eye to the bone-jarring, brain-rattling hits in the elevator, on the staircase, to the assaults in the hallway, the abuse in the bedroom. Does he help us win, they ask? And that's the only thing they ask. Here's to the coaches who find reasons not to take a stand, reasons to let the rules go slack. The structure of the locker room will do him good, they say, or benching him wouldn't be fair to his teammates who've worked so hard to get here. Everyone deserves a second chance, they say, when what they really mean is, I want to win this game. Yep, here's to the gods of the gridiron, but they're hardly alone. There are gods of the hardwood, too, and the base paths and the soccer pitch. And here's to all the stars, the superstars, the megastars, the ones who've been taught so young and so often that the rules don't apply to them, that favors will be granted, gifts, gear, girls, that corners will be cut, that excuses will be made. Classes will be invented for them. Papers will be written for them. Grades will be altered for them. Boosters will open their wallets. Cheerleaders will open their hearts. Men twice their age will bow down before them, will dream of being them, because they can throw hard, run fast, hit the shot, pound the ball, make the catch, make the tackle, or break one. Nothing else matters. That's what they learn so young and so often. Nothing else matters. The rules don't apply. So why are we surprised?
Thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Stay warm. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.